Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of The Table, a discussion about race and religion. My name is David Tilan. I will be your moderator this evening. I'm so happy for all of our guests that are showing up. A couple of them are very dear to my heart. They're all dear to my heart, to be honest, but some of them are very dear. I have my actual officiant at my wedding is actually here today. You'll get to see him in a moment. But I'm super excited for everyone being here. Today we're talking about a really, really awesome topic that has been, I know, in my heart. And so I want to introduce all of our discussion people. What do I call them? What is it? Panelists. That's what it is. Our panelists. Yeah. I don't want to objectify you and call you a panelist. You're people first. Panelist later. Our discussion panelist people. I'll do that. We have Lachlan, we have Jade, we have Daniela, and then we have Charles. And we're so happy that they're here today. And I do have a quick icebreaker just to get everyone kind of warmed up. It's a scenario for you guys as well, just to check yourself. Imagine a scenario where your house is burning down. All the people are out, all your pets are out, so no life is lost. But you have an option to save three things. What would those three things be? You have option to save three things. What would those three things be? For me, I think the default for all of us would be the Bible, right? But I've seen stories where that survives most fires. That's what I've seen. So mine would be a backpack with a bunch of clothes in it. I have a backpack with a bunch of clothes and a bunch of snacks in it. It has everything I might need for like a weekend, just in case. You never know. Stacey's laughing at me behind the camera, but hey guys, you never know. The second thing would be one of my first pictures I took with my wife. It had me next to a wall with an inhaler on the ground because I'm an asthmatic. And the next thing would be there's a safety box with all of our documents in it, so I'll save that thing. Yeah. Who wants to go next? Three things to save. House on fire. Three things you can save.
I can go. So my name is Charles, by the way. I'm glad to be here. Three things. So I would definitely say I have a safety box as well. So that's number one. So I can attest to David on that. We have a hard drive with all of our photos on it. So that would be huge. And then the third would be my wife's ring because it's probably the most expensive thing in the house. So let's be honest.
Amen. Anyone next?
I guess I could go next. So I'm Daniela. I'm going to be super annoying because I have it here. I would bring my laptop. It's an investment. I'm a college student and it's necessary. I'm also an asthmatic, so maybe I'll bring my inhaler.
Hey, come on, we're on here. I got another one.
And last thing would be pictures also of family members.
Very cool.
Well, my three things, number one, I've been working all summer, so I have a box full of all the money I've earned because I'm saving up for a car. So I would take that first, and then
Respect, man, respect.
and there's another box with my grandpa he made for us, and I keep all my sentimental things, pictures, and stuff from his workshop in there. So I take that. And the third thing, I'd probably do the same thing as you, stuff like clothes. I have a bag.
Yeah,
So,
for the night.
Yeah.
The Motel 8.
Yeah, my favorite outfit,
Very cool. Last but not least.
All right, so same as Danielle, bring my laptop. Actually, all my electronics has my life on them. And probably my guitar. Spent some good money on that. What else, man? And I guess, some memorabilia from...
Teddy bear or...
No, not a teddy bear. Pictures and just notes from, I don't know, childhood and stuff.
Very cool. So a lot of practical stuff, a lot of sentimental stuff. Very cool. Well, today we're talking all about racial prejudice and the church. I know a lot of us come from different churches, different backgrounds, different states, or different ethnicities. So it's all diversity on the table. But I'll open up first question here. How well do you feel the Christian church, that's the Christian church at large, in America has handled the topic of racial prejudice? And do you feel that there is or has been racial prejudice in the Adventist church? So that's the question on the table. I want to throw it over to you guys. What are your thoughts about that? How well do you feel a Christian church at large has been dealing with racial prejudice? And do you think that that the Adventist church has racial prejudice in it, or has it in the past? Jumping right to it. That's like jumping right to the meat.
Okay. Well, everyone's looking at me, so I will, I guess, be the first to take a stab. To the first question, I think that in many ways, I think that the Christian church, especially in America and or Western society, has at times been complicit in racial prejudice. I don't want to say, actually, let me take a step back. Humans in general are prejudiced, right? And humans are a part of the church. So just taking it from a simple standpoint, the church would not be immune to having racial prejudice within it at large, right? I think now it's becoming more obvious because of the time and the moment that we're in, when the church is not exactly active against racial prejudice. There's an author that I am very fond of. His name is Ibram Kendi, and he has this idea that he posits where he says it's no longer good enough to be not racist. And a lot of times we have conversations about the church not being racist. But he says, or his theory, his ideology is that you are either anti-racist or you are racist by your complicity with racism, right? So basically, you can be in denial of your participation just by being silent. And for me, I feel like the church more often than not does not fall in the category of anti-racist. And so I would say they haven't handled the topic of racial prejudice very well. That's my.
Wow, profound.
So I'll add on to that. I also agree with the sentiments of the being racist and the being anti-racist. I think that's such a huge mentality shift that people need to take into account, because it isn't just good enough to, as an individual, not participate in or have racist ideologies, or even you might not even know that implicitly, unconsciously you have them, but not allowing, tolerating it around you is also a very important step that we need to be taking. In addition, going back to the first question, the Christian church at large, I think we have to understand our history as a Christian church, and it's not a very easy conversation to have. And I know that I didn't really realize it until I was much later on, until I got to college, but the Christian church has been a mobilizer in colonization and missionizing, which is a whole topic in and of itself, but colonization is a core part of systemic racism and is what causes white supremacy notions and other things of that nature. So understanding where we are as the Christian church and how we separate ourselves from our past, but knowing that that past is there and has affected us currently is extremely, extremely important.
Well, adding on to what he said, I believe that Nike did a campaign once all the Black Lives Matter and everything started because of George Floyd, and they said don't do it. So for I mean, because they were trying to say that through silence that it's racism. So we're not, by not speaking, that you're supporting racist, or sorry, by not saying anything, you're complying, which is, it really does not help the movement and does not push us forward as a human race to eliminate racism. And so I feel that the Christian church, they've been too silent, and they're too conservative as far as being controversial. So, I mean, by not saying anything, they've been helping the racists, I think, and racism in America and abroad.
Yeah, so just looking at the Christian church at large in America, I think it's been divided on the topic of racial prejudice, and often you can see two completely different sides being taken, which is crazy because you think that Christianity would be united in something like this. Yeah, obviously, I agree with all of you saying that I think the Christian church in general has been quiet on things of racial prejudice, etc. But I think in general, Christians would say they're against racism. They say it's wrong, right? Like this, nowadays, at least, they would say slavery is wrong, racism is wrong, all that is wrong. But there's some Christians see that say that racism is wrong, but it's not a thing anymore. They say that racial prejudice, ended when slavery ended, when the civil rights movement happened, and there was desegregation. That there's no racial prejudice anymore. But what that happened 50, 60 years ago, just in the last century, and it's not over. It's not over, and I think it's so dangerous that people can ignore that. It's so dangerous that, it's so dangerous that they don't see that. Yeah.
Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Jay says. I think it is incredibly dangerous to ignore it. I think it's also uncomfortable, to use Daniela's word, to grapple with the fact that the church was directly responsible at times, again, at large, for slavery. So the very thing that was used or weaponized against people of color was quote unquote Christian values at that time, right? And so if you understand that history, as she said, and then coming to the present, and as Jay was saying, still ignoring the present, actual today events that are happening still as a result of that very same history, then you find yourselves where we are today, where you have a lot of individuals who look again at the church at large, because as Jay said, it's not fair to paint a completely broad brush. There are a lot of sects of the Christian church who are actively combating racism, right? But unfortunately, it is overtaken, to borrow what Lachlan was saying, by a conservative portion of the church that seems to have a louder platform at times, right? And so it doesn't look like we're unified. We're not unified. And so if we're not unified, then our discord, if you will speak louder, right, than those who are trying to speak on behalf of those who don't have a voice. So I think they all made very, very good points. And I think it is unfortunate that we have come to this juncture. I mean, I would argue that the reason why we're having this conversation, right, is emblematic of the fact that the church probably didn't respond well, right? Like, we wouldn't necessarily be discussing it at a table if it weren't for the fact that there are some holes in our armor, if you will.
Interesting. I like what all of you guys said. I just want to give a follow-up question. What would it look like because I heard, being anti-racist. And for a lot of people, that was a new term for me. Dave, not racist. Yeah, I don't hate people or people of color, right? But then if I were to ask me if I'm anti-racist, I'm like, whoa, hold on, wait. Okay, I never heard that term before, right? So in your heads, what does that mean for the church to be anti-racist? What does that look like for the church to do something like that, to approach evangelism and to approach the church's mission to spread the gospel? What does it look like to be anti-racist in that sentiment?
So I think that part of it, and I vocalized this to some of my church leaders back when this was freshly new, it's the difference between trying to think of the best response versus knowing that you are going to respond, or whether or not you should respond. The question isn't whether or not you should respond. It should be a direct yes. And maybe you don't have all the right words in the moment, but even one sign of vocalizing whether that be on social media or whether that be within your own four walls, which we didn't have at that moment. But there has to be that first step to know that the people within your congregation hears you. And without that, people feel lost and unheard by their church leaders.
I agree. I think another aspect to it is how am I or how are we as a church combating the inequities within our greater community, right? Every church is within a community. I think a lot of times we try to think on this large, grandiose scale, but if you always bring it down to the community that God placed you in as a church, you're going to find a ton of inequities, right? So whether it be food deserts, whether it be the prison industrial complex, maybe you are near an area that has a high rate of foster children, right? These are all inequities as a result, however we want to argue it, from systemic racism, right, in this country. And so understanding your community and how you are reaching the least of these within like literally the 4 or 5 mile radius of your church is an act of being anti-racist. Now, the opposite, because I think it's important to understand, is only showing up for church, right? That is not being an anti-racist because you are literally just showing up for entertainment or to warm a pew. And I think that there is a fundamental purpose that the church as an institution, specifically the local church, an opportunity has to combat, again, systemic inequities around the building. So for me, yeah, to add on to what Daniela already eloquently said, that's what, yeah, being anti-racist would look like for me.
I like to add on to that systemic racism, and I think that, as I mentioned earlier, something that people exist there, and because it's a separate thing. Systemic racism is its own, or not. It's a very its own thing in a sense, but it's just that within a church, within a lot of churches, there is systemic racism going on. It's in the government, it's in schools, it's in the healthcare system. And yeah, I think it's important to recognize that, and in our churches to recognize that. And I think, as Danielle said, you have to take the first step. And the first step is addressing that it's real, addressing it, that it's real in our churches, addressing the fact that this is going on in our world. And yeah, I think being honest with our congregations that this is a real thing, that this is important, and that's the first step to combating systemic racism.
Yeah, I agree a lot with all of what all of you said. And the first thing we need to do is address it in our congregation on a smaller level. And I mean, I live in an area where systemic racism is very obvious. And Hinsdale is predominantly white. All their schools are predominantly white, and people who are minorities that have moved there that we've known have moved away because they feel like they've been racially profiled. And so, I mean, on a level of our towns and our churches, I think we just need to be anti-racist, and we need to be in our churches just following basic Christian principles that we need to love and accept everyone, no matter backgrounds, race, and yeah, just address the problem because there is one. It's
interesting because when I take a look at the variety of Christian churches, I know that there is a sentiment out there that's saying, hey, we've gotten the Civil Rights Act, and desegregation has happened, and we're just trying to progress, we're just trying to move forward. And so we get the statement saying, hey, I don't see color, so our church doesn't see color, we're just trying to move forward and try to bring everyone to an equal playing field or what have you. What would you say in response to sentiments like that, where people are saying, hey, we just want to progress and just bring everyone onto the same table, we're all eating at the same table, and we're just trying to do and for them that might be anti-racism, is bringing everyone to the same table and saying, hey, we're eating together. What would you say to a sentiment like that?
Go ahead.
Okay. So there's actually a term for saying like you don't see color. It's called color blindness. It's been really highly studied within like social psychology, and it actually promotes more bias and racial prejudice because when you say you don't see color, you're causing an experience because of the color of their skin. And so my response would be to see color and to understand what that has impacted their life and why they may have different experiences than I would or you would or anyone, correct? And then the second one is we need a new table. It's not about bringing in another chair. I think we need to rebuild the table that we're sitting at so that the conversations are actually equal.
Wow. That is a very powerful statement. I think that a lot of times, and this goes back to what Jay said about ignoring, to Daniela's point, you can't discount someone's lived experience. And it goes back to the purpose of the church. If you have a community, people come into your doors and they are telling you something is happening in their lives, maybe their families, and then you respond by saying, we're trying to progress. What you're literally saying to them is that I don't believe you, right? You're literally telling them, I don't believe that these things are happening to you, that you're experiencing these things, right? And so my question to that individual is then, why would you then expect people to continue to come to your church if there is no empathy, if there is no active listening, right? It's simply you wanting people to be in the doors, come to the table, as Daniela said, but the table is specifically skewed towards your viewpoint, and you can't even see that, right? I think there's a scripture that I was reading this morning that kind of illustrated this. It is in Hebrews 10, and it talks about, it's actually scripture that we quote all the time about why we should come together for church, right? Do not forsake the assembling of your brethren. Well, before that, there's a verse right before that says that the coming together is for the stirring up. And the word actually translates to incite, right? So the idea being that we're coming together to incite one another to action, right? Wow. And so if you truly understand the purpose of church and what Paul is sort of positing here in this verse, he's saying, look, when you come to this recreated table, it's supposed to make you uncomfortable, to the point it's supposed to make you so uncomfortable that when you leave the building, you'll go do something about what you're uncomfortable with, wow. Right? That is the point of the ecclesia, if we talk about it, right? And so I think to that person, again, to your question, I would say, are you really doing church? You're never comfortable. Like, if you've never seen people who don't look like you, who don't have your same experiences, you're coming together, but you're forsaking that stirring up part, which is probably the most key ingredient to the whole thing.
Well, I think it's Sabbath, isn't it? It really is. We're getting some. You might need to take a praise break. I think it's awesome. I think what you said, Danielle, you said we need a new table, because I feel like the way I see it, and not to cut you guys off if you guys want to say it, you guys can definitely jump in. But when I hear that statement, and I myself, I'm trying to do my best to listen and to understand as best as I can. When I've heard that, I wonder, I'm like, yeah, there's something wrong with that statement. But knowing these perspectives, it's as if the table that we're inviting someone to eat at was a table that person wasn't allowed in at one point in time. Like, hold on, wait, I wasn't even liked at this table. Like, why are you saying that I can sit here now? Right? So it's negating, one, the individual, but two, when it comes to recreating the table, I think one, that's also recreating the church, right? Like what you said, the church isn't a place where we just get entertained. I think that's a horrible. That's consumerism. I think that's rotten. But to literally stir people and say, hey, how can you make the world around us more kingdom-like? I think that's definitely a new table perspective that I for one, have never heard someone else have the same sentiment as that. But yeah, you guys can interject as well with your thoughts. The question was on the perspective of, hey, we're just trying to progress. Everyone can eat at the table.
Okay, so that's amazing points you guys put out. Amazing. And just going along with the whole table analogy, that's the basis of systemic racism, where people are like, oh, we'll just bring you to the table. but there's still that systemized, that basis of that one point where it was like, oh, you couldn't sit at the table at one point. And there's still so many things centered around that on the table that, again, they're just trying to ignore. And then when they bring other people to the table, it's still affecting them. It's still there. And there's a difference between being equal and equity, There's a difference with, and equality is, just bring them to the table, let them be at the level we're at kind of thing. And then there's equity where you are understanding where that person is coming from. You're understanding their background, everything about them, their gender, their religion, their ethnicity, and understanding how each come together to make that person, and that gives them a totally different experience than you would. And to understand that and I guess essentially cater to that and break down the table and build it up again so that it caters to all those different things, I think that's super important to how to change things up.
Yeah, I mean, like what Daniela said about breaking down the table and just rebuilding it in a way where everyone feels included. We take into account everyone's past, what experiences and they've been through, and just creating an environment where everyone feels accepted and loved, and they're able to worship God. And I mean, that's fundamentally what a church should be, somewhere where you don't feel a barrier between people, and you should just be able to worship God and be more kingdom-like.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, the other half of that question was, do you feel like there has been racial prejudice in the church, or do you think it still exists in the Adventist church? We're making it a little tighter into our worlds. Do you feel like that has been something that's been in the church, in the Adventist church, or is still in the Adventist church to a degree?
Yes, I think so.
Affirmative.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things we said does apply to the Adventist church. And it can be seen just in the leadership of our church. How many people of color are in the higher and higher positions of our church? You can see it in just universities, our SDA universities. It's a very real thing in Adventism.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jade. There was a movement that happened a couple of years ago. I happen to know a lot about it just because one of my close friends was involved, but It Is Time AU happened at one of our campuses. And one of the reflections that I had with my friend was that the reality is that could have happened at any of our campuses. I mean, the experiences and the stories it could be applied. And I graduated from an Adventist institution of higher learning. I've gone to academy. I went to elementary school, and I've seen it at all different levels. I think one anecdote I will say, and I'm not going to, again, give any names away, but at a meeting, I was of the Black Student Union at my school at the time. And we were having a conversation with one of the deans there about kind of bringing in a more, how should I say this, ethnically rich service at the school at the time. And I can remember one of his comments was that we could not disrupt what was already going on because it was the correct way to worship. Now, at the time, I didn't understand what he was saying. Like, I didn't understand how loaded what he was saying to me was. And I use this just as an example because I think that this has happened. I know that it's happened just from other experiences I've heard across Adventism, right? Whether it's discrimination in terms of worship. If you look at even the conference breakdown, right? And why that was, the history of how that came to be. And how, if you look at white flight, which is something that happens in society, right? But we are, again, not an anomaly. We're not like an exception to that rule. It happens in churches all the time. My family has been in a variety of different churches because we've moved around, and I can say that without fail, people of color can easily assimilate and kind of ingratiate themselves to communities of, a variety of different churches, right? But if the flip side happens, the church all of a sudden becomes the color of the people who are coming in, right? So this happens across Adventism, across schools. And it's just something that we don't necessarily talk about. It's not to say that, again, as I go back to the beginning, humans have flaws. Being in the Adventist church does not then make you an exception to having those same flaws. And those same humans are still in the church. I have my flaws as well. I want to throw that out there as well. But yes, it's a long-winded answer to say that we definitely have the same problems as the Christian church at large, for sure.
I also want to add something. I have my laptop here for this exact purpose. I pulled up some percentages. So this is from a Pew Research study, so if anyone wants to go look at it. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is actually the most diverse religious group in the United States, at least in 2015. I don't think it's changed that much. I know AU is like one of the most diverse campuses.
Respect my alma mater. Come on, Steve, let's go. Let's make it happen.
And this makes us particularly unique and gives us such a great advantage if we knew how to use it. If we knew how to understand each part of that diversity that we pride ourselves so much in. And instead of separating like by regions or conferences or even churches that are only a few miles away from each other but have different populations, we might be able to diversify our own views, our own mentalities. And so that's just a way that racial prejudice may not even exemplify itself in such a large form as we see on social media sometimes. It's just the fact that we have something at our disposal that's so beautiful, and we have yet learned the best way to embrace that.
I think that's tough though. Like when I think about it, the various forms of worship, to really bring that into a single house. Like, is that something that do you guys feel is a reality that we can reach? Like, is the reality then that there are no more all white churches, or no more all black churches, or no more all Hispanic churches, or no more Phil-Am churches? Is that a reality that that you guys see as possible in our lifetime?
I think it's definitely possible. I think that it's more than anything, it's a heart issue, right? Because you have to ask yourself, what's my motivation? Is my motivation going to the church because I like the worship style, right? Or is my motivation, I want to go there because I'm comfortable? And this is all racist, I want to be clear. I'm comfortable with the people that are there. And so again, I go back to that original point of what is the purpose of church in general, and then what is of church for you? Because if you're going to be comfortable, then maybe what you're saying, is not possible. It might not be possible. I can be honest and say that it might not be possible. If we're always going to want to be comfortable, if we're always going to want to feel good, it might not be possible.
That's tough. That's tough because like worship styles are very dominant when it comes to churches and the way they function. So, that's definitely a hard sentiment to have people stomach, I guess.
It is, but my argument though is the undercurrent of it, and this is just my personal opinion, and I want to hear everyone's opinion, of course, is that the undercurrent to that though is not necessarily worship style, right? Like, because for example, I love gospel music. Gospel. If you were asking me my number one choice of worship, it would be gospel music. But the church that I'm at right now it's not a gospel church, right? But I have prioritized my love for the people of that church and the way that it challenges me to be a better individual. So my priority list is what really dictates my decision making. So I'm saying that there's an undercurrent. It's not just when you say like, oh, I prefer this worship style. We all have preferences, but it's more a reflection of what our priorities are.
Wow. Yeah. No, I love that. Any other thoughts about that when it comes to racism in the Adventist church?
Well, as you're saying, for all the churches to assimilate, I think it would be hard because there's barriers such as language. I mean, the Hispanic churches, the European churches, but I just think that it's possible, but it'll be very hard. It would be very hard, and I think I can see it happening in our lifetime, if everything falls into place. But I mean, I know people from other churches. They're people, and they have their church family, and they love to connect with each other. But I think we all share a common belief in being Adventists, and if we come together as a whole, it'd be hard, but I think it's possible.
Now, this disclaimer, I'm not saying that I'm for total assimilation of the church, right? I come from a Filipino church background. I'm now part of a church that is very, very diverse. But I'm saying, like, is that even a priority? And what it sounds like is that maybe it's not. Maybe that isn't the issue. Maybe that's changing the churches that we have now. And so, kind of leading into our next question, when it comes to a kingdom approach when it comes to racism in our churches, how does the gospel that you know and understand in your heart, how does that when it comes to approach church and racism and racial talk? How does that change, if any change? How does it change, or how does it shift your perspective, or how do you feel like the gospel runs counterculturally to the culture we see around us?
Okay. So there's something that I struggled with, and I was talking to someone about this recently. How I didn't originally bring the church to the same standards as I would bring any other institution around me. Like, I would really think, I would know that this company or corporation has these racial prejudices and they aren't vocal, or they're vocal towards the other end. And I would be very quick to be like, okay, I'm not going to shop from them. I'm not going to, give my money to this entity because I don't agree with it, or to an extent, one way or the other. Even my own school institutions that I've attended, like, I would also feel that way if I felt that they were doing something I didn't find was correct. And I realized that was not only wrong of me to do, but it should be the reverse. I think that the church has an even higher standard that we should be holding it to, and that's how I would talk to my friends who would be like, oh, like, why would you want to be a part of a church that has this racial prejudice or whatnot? And I would always tell them it's because I didn't have racial prejudice and wouldn't have been part of this opposing side. And I really do believe that. And then I realized, well, that's exactly why I should expect my church to also hold similar beliefs and root for the morality of it.
I love that. Rooting for the morality of the church. Man, I think the gospel says a lot about this topic. One, it's the great equalizer, right? Like, the fact that it is not righteousness by race, it's not righteousness by works, it's righteousness by faith, right? And so we all have an equal opportunity for that. But I also think that the way that Jesus displays the gospel and acted upon it is very powerful. Two stories when I was thinking about this question come to mind. The one, both involve Samaritans. You have the story of the Samaritan who goes to help the man who's on the road, right? And Jesus in that story is sort of humanizing Samaritans who are Jews but are looked at as less than, right? So there is distinct bigotry, if you will, within the context of that time between the Jews and the Samaritans. And so Jesus tells a Jew a story who is in the church about a man who is a Samaritan who helps out someone who's on the road, right? And the church people didn't help. But then there's another story of Jesus saying that I have to go to Samaria, right? When you read John 4, and he's saying, I have to go to Samaria. And we always jump to the woman and we focus on the woman. But the first part of that story for me is the most powerful, because Jesus, who was a Jew, should not be going to Samaria according to the cultural of that time, like the cultural expectations, requirements of that moment, right? He should not be going to Samaria. In fact, people would literally go out of their way to skip Samaria. Jews, right? It's literally
It's a rough side of town. It's a rough side of town. You don't go there.
Rough side of town, right? But it's all because of their racial prejudice. And so Jesus says, I have to go through Samaria. I've got to stop there to see this woman. And both instances for me tell me that Jesus is not only concerned, yes, with the least of these, but he's also recognizing him being a Jew, his own privilege, and how he is evening out himself on our behalf. And that is the epitome of the gospel for me, is that Jesus himself made himself to be of no repute, to be just like us. And in these instances, he is going out of his way to pursue these individuals who he should, according to expectations of the time, have this towards, right? That says a lot to us today, for how we treat the least of these, how we are able to respond. Are we truly doing what Jesus did? And I even have to challenge myself and say, a lot of the times, I'm probably not. Like, I'm probably not. Like, if the cultural norm is for me to go around Samaria, whatever that looks like today, I'm definitely going around Samaria. Like, let's just be honest. Like, let's call it what it is. So much so, last thing I'll say, and I'll let go of the mic, that when Jesus is leaving his disciples, I think it's all intentional. He says, you'll receive power, right? When the Holy Spirit comes on you, be my witnesses. And he says, Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. He's again speaking to the bigotry within his own people.
I can imagine them like, hold
Well,
on, Jesus,
sure
I'm
about
not,
that? Right.
like Judea, I'm cool with. Jerusalem, Judea, I'm cool with.
But
Are
Samaria,
you sure he's Samaria? Are you sure this guy?
like the right-hand man to Jesus, again, was a professed bigot, right? Like Peter, he's a prophet. So that, again, it's not so much, and I just want to say again, it is okay to have flaws, because Jesus literally is demonstrating you're still welcome. Like, not only am I fighting on behalf, not only am I being an anti-racist, I'm accepting racists into the fold. Like, that is the beauty of the gospel for me.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that, and just, you bring to mind Galatians 3:28, whereas there's neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. That was what Jesus that's what he exemplified or emanated when he was on earth. And Jesus came to this earth to show us what kind of kingdom he represents. And that was a kingdom that stands up for the poor, the widow, the fatherless, the hungry, the oppressed, all of them. And he came to help the least of these, is that, as I say, those that were suffering and essentially at the bottom of a totem pole. And, when you look at the people that suffer, the question is, who has the most power, I guess, who has the most authority in our society, and who is suffering because of the misuse of this power. And, I think you can argue that it's like Black Americans, people of color, immigrants, et cetera, and to not have the thought to stand up for these people, to not take a political stand, like to stop for social injustices, and is just, I think, it's a little sad, a little confusing to not want to do that. In my opinion, I think when we look at Jesus, a lot of people are kind of hesitant to consider him like a political activist, and this may be a tough topic to talk about, and it's true that maybe he didn't stand up against the Roman government, the ruling people of that time, but he definitely took a very vocal and active stand against the local government, which were the Jewish leaders, in a time where religion and government were the same. you know. So, you know, the Jewish religion dictated the laws, the rules, etc., of Jewish people's daily lives. And he definitely spoke up against, you know, a lot of things they were doing to oppress people, to keep certain people, you know, keep certain people away, keep like Samaritans away, keep the poor over there, the lepers over there, you know. Yeah, I think in a sense he was politically active.
Yeah, I mean, as I think we were all taught as Christians when we were young, we need to be like Jesus or try to be as close to Jesus as we can. And as you said, Jesus embraced Samaritans, and I think we need to try to embrace modern day Samaritans. So, I mean, minorities, people that are felons, I mean, people that have bad pasts, just in general, we need to embrace modern day Samaritans and be more like Jesus.
I think one of the things that really stuck out to me after hearing all of your responses is when Charles, what you said about how Jesus accepted even the racist. I think that's one of the things that I think culturally is the hardest thing. When you would tell me or tell someone who's been oppressed or even has ancestry who have been enslaved and saying, hey, you have to love this racist, how many of you guys would feel that would probably be one of the things you would say no to? Like, all right, Jesus, you know, you'd be like, all right, Jesus did that, but I'm not Jesus, right? So we make that excuse. But that's super hard to do, to actually want the best for the worst of racists. How many of us would agree to doing that? That's incredibly tough. What do you guys think about that? If racist in church, or love like leaning onto them, that's something that you would fight against?
I think so. I want to qualify and say that Jesus absolutely loved on Peter. It was very clear, but Jesus also confronted Peter a lot. Okay. Peter probably got confronted the most. He probably talked the most. So that's why he got confronted the most. Right. But he didn't necessarily come to understand his own bigotry or racism in this context, right, until after Jesus left, right? The dream that he had in Acts 10, right? So I say this to say there is a context to all of this. Jesus was inspired to choose the disciples that he chose. Okay. There's a time and a place, as Ecclesiastes says, for everything. And so I don't want people to take away, the reason why I'm qualifying this, because I don't want people to take away listening today that, I need to go out there and just start confronting racists. You might need to do that, but that might not necessarily be what God is calling you to do right now. Right. And it goes back to who God places in your community, in your sphere of influence. You should absolutely strive, as Daniela has stated, Jadalyn, Lachlan, you should absolutely strive to be an anti-racist, 100%. But to the degree that you are impressed will look different for different people. Like I always like to say, salvation is universal. Everyone has the opportunity to accept the gospel, right? To be saved. The application is individual. It's personal, right? So how that looks for me, how that looks for us at this table, it's going to look very different for everyone, right? And so Jesus, he was impressed, he was convicted. The Father had told him, these are the disciples that you're going to have. And so he followed suit. And so maybe in our church contexts, yes, we absolutely might have individuals that might come in and we are supposed to nurture them, speak to them, confront them as the Holy Spirit instructs. But there might be a time that, as you'll see very often in Scripture, Jesus did not heal everyone that he came across. Jesus did not go to every town. He talks about it extensively, how the Holy Spirit kept him from doing certain things. So we got to have both sides. You got to take both sides of the coin on that.
Wow. Very interesting. Just a little segue. This is for those who are watching online. If you do have a question or a comment, I know we had a couple already streaming in. Question or comment, throw it into the comments on either, I think we're on Facebook and YouTube. Go ahead and throw it into the comments, and then we'll try to address it as best we can here. But I just want to move forward with the last question before we go on to the online questions. Is so within our own local church context, I think that's kind of where our discussion about coming off of what Jesus didn't heal everyone, and what Jadalyn said, he was involved in his local government and his immediate region. How would you guys encourage others to address the issue of racial prejudice within your own spaces?
I'd personally like to speak to, the Asian American population. Yeah, I'm from Hinzel Falam Filipino Church, and I grew up there. And I think first of all, as an Asian American, just like to address the model minority myth, which is, if you don't know what it is, it's basically this idea that Asians as a minority in America are successful, unassuming, they're contributing to the economy, they have, a lot of them are doctors, lawyers, engineers kind of thing. But, and kind of sounds like a really good, stereotype to have for a population. However, it also paints Asian Americans as quiet, unassuming, law followers. They don't want to shake things up. Most importantly, they're not people who would shake things up. And and I think the issue is that a lot of Asians do fit that model. They kind of but the problem is we need to recognize where that stays. The whole model minority is a term coined by a white American sociologist named William Peterson, who presented the socioeconomic success among a select segment of Asian Americans, particularly Japanese Americans, in the years following the World War II. They used their socioeconomic success as an antithesis to African American claims of persistent racial oppression and barriers during the 1960s civil rights movement, at the height of Black-led urban uprisings across the United States. This was a term specifically used to put a racial wedge and to pit two minorities against each other. And I had heard of the model minority myth before, and I just thought, oh, it's just a stereotype. But this was a term used as a political movement to pit two minorities together, to promote anti-Blackness, to promote racism. And that just blew my mind when I learned that, And I think that should be something that Asian Americans should recognize, And as Asian Americans, yes, we have had racism against us. We have had things that we've struggled with because of our race as well. But we should also understand that we do not have the same experiences as other people of color, as Black Americans. With segregation, police brutality, discrimination in the United States. And speaking especially as a Filipino American, and just looking at our history in the Philippines of where we were colonized, oppressed, treated as less than, and yes, many injustices done to us, even by America. If anything, these facts should encourage us to further stand up and stand with our brothers and sisters of color, stand with Black lives, and stand against racial injustice. This should encourage us more to stand up.
I want to just reiterate that that's exactly like the mentality we should all have, is to educate ourselves proactively, and be willing and normalize understanding where we are different, and normalize where we've fallen short of true understanding of others. Personally, I've learned to to see my own privilege. I'm Latina, and I have differences because of that, but I'm also very white passing, which means I will not have the same experience as another Latina, Latinx, who has darker skin color than I do. And I need to learn that in order for me to be a better ally to individuals who do experience that. And it's not anyone, any person of color, it's especially no Black person, Black folk, to educate us. We need to take the time to educate ourselves and know our own history and know the history of others, of Indigenous folk, of Native folk, of all of the people that make this melting pot, which I really think is a salad bowl because our histories are so important. We don't want to melt them together. But that's like my own analogy. I really like copyrighted. but really, it's like we have a lot of churches have Wednesday night prayer nights. Why can't we also add having a professor come speak and talk to us about what racial prejudice is, or different coined terms that we can use in our day-to-day lives. It shouldn't just take going to a psychology course, or like to even like go to a Afro studies course to learn this because you're in college right now. You should constantly be learning it past getting a degree, or even having not gone to college. It shouldn't be that inaccessible that only certain people in our population think that they should know about other people's history.
Yeah, I believe that, like she was saying, we need to try to be empathetic and put ourselves in the shoes, or I can't really put myself in the shoes of, say, a Black male in the United States. They or I can try, but I'll never truly understand the prejudice against them, and the system is pretty much rigged against them. If you're, say, from the south side of Chicago, the odds of you being able to become a successful businessman and are so much lower than someone like me, who's from Hinsdale, has a very nice school district. And I mean, we just need to try to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and look from their perspective and try to move forward with that mindset, and just really take action against, or be anti-racist, like what you're saying in the beginning, and try to get the others around you to rally with you and just try to end this, or we can't try to do our best to end racism around us and in our church and in our community.
I think that's what you said, Lachlan. I really appreciate this, because that's something that I personally came to a conclusion with when all this started. Is one of my best friends who pours into me as a person. He's he's Canadian American, but he's Black. He's Caribbean, and he was telling me of, we were in a car. It's like a joke. A Mexican, a Filipino, and Black guys are sitting in the car, and we're all driving to this interfaith march. And he asks us, have you guys felt any type of police oppression or negative incidents with the police? And I said, no, mine are. I used to drag race on the street and stuff like that. So I guess that would get slapped on the wrist. And then another guy's, the Mexican in the group, said, no, pretty good over here. And he said, yeah, I haven't had that experience. He goes, I've had a gun drawn on me twice. And I was like, Adrian? Like that? No way, man. Like that struck a chord to me so personally, because one, that's one of my dearest friends. And it putting myself in that position, I'm just trying to what it was like in the driver's seat when that happened. To have that image in his back of his head, maybe I won't come home tonight. Maybe I won't see my kids. Like I've never in my life had that experience, but I think it's time for me to learn about it and to bring to give it value and give it something that's quantitative, that we can measure, that we can say it's not just your feeling. That was something that has happened to you that means something, that has value. So I appreciate what you said, Lachlan. I think that's really important.
That's powerful. What you said, David, and Lachlan as well, about this idea of really listening and feeling like, even when you're saying that, David, I can see that you felt the emotion of that moment, right, for your friend. I'm also I really appreciate the thought that Jade and Daniela shared about kind of the intersection, appreciating the intersection of our ethnicities, of our connections, right, as people. No matter the background, no matter the origin, where we're from, right, our heritage, there is some type of intersection you can find, right? And so really learning about that, I can definitely appreciate that. I want to kind of touch base on the second part of the question as well, in terms of looking at our church context. And I want to champion and sort of big up to my local church. I think they've done some amazing things that can be sort of an example to other local churches. One, we have a very prominent food pantry that is a huge influence on the greater community, right? So you're being the answer to a problem there, right? We've done community baby showers. We've also helped to pay off the bills of the lunch bills for students, right, in need, free and reduced lunch, who maybe don't have the funds to pay off their bills. I know another friend who pastors at a church where they actually did something similar to what Daniela is talking about in terms of education. They brought in an organization that specializes in helping people from lower incomes get houses, so obtain home loans, which is another huge disparity within our communities, right? Whether it be flu shot drive, so offering free flu shots at your church. Another, which will probably be huge, just a wink, wink, heads up to those who are listening for right COVID-19. That's another great idea. Providing masks, right? These are just small ways that go a long way in addressing, again, the inequities around your local church. And so I think the main thing for me as an individual, just going along with what everyone said, is making sure that I'm educated, even myself as a Black male, right? And being a part of a continuing community. But I'm not the only, right? My wife is, and so understanding her struggle and the things that they experience, right? And understanding sort of even with migrant workers, understanding ICE and all the things that are going on with that. Even right now, as we speak, there's a major protest going on downtown for that. So am I actively involved in seeking out a way to speak on behalf of others who don't look like me as well, right? Even though, yes, I have my own struggles, but am I looking out for everyone else also? So yeah.
I think that's important. One of my favorite writers, C.S. Lewis, he was talking about suffering, and he said, I'm going to butcher this, but it's along these lines, so bear with me. For those who are watching, I can't quote this, but I know the premise. But he was talking about suffering and how everyone's suffering cannot be measured to the next person's, right? So if Charles suffered X suffering and I suffered X suffering, you can't bring those and measure them and say, hey, it looks like Charles suffered more. What Charles is saying is, hey, yes, I have had an experience myself. I have a certain particular experience. But I think when it comes to being anti-racist, it's saying, hey, you're struggling, I'm struggling, and I don't need you to see my struggle, but I want to see yours, right? And if I'm always looking after what Charles is suffering with, and he's always looking after what I'm suffering with, that's none other than the gospel. Right? That's what God says what love looks like. Is Adam and Eve were saying, hey, I'm always going to look after you. And Eve was saying, I'm always going to look after you. And the only time there was ever division was when they stopped looking out for each other. Right? When they started looking for fig leaves to cover their own suffering. And instead of saying, hey, let me help you with yours. And so I think that's one of the antidotes to racism in our churches, to say, hey, yes, I'm going through a hard time, but I'll put that aside and I want to hear what you're going through. I think that's huge, and it's scary, but I think it's needed.
I love that. I think it is incredible. One thing that you said that stuck out to me, because I can hear people who might say, well, what about certain movements, right? My brother likes to say there are certain inequities that are having their moment, if you will, right? So right now, let's say the Black Lives Matter movement, and someone will say, well, all lives matter, right? Well, my response to that, even what you're saying, is if you have children, right? And I'm not a parent, but when I was going through something specific, say I had some kidney trouble as a kid, my parents obviously paid more attention to me in that moment, right? Because I had an emergency that they needed to adhere to. It wasn't because they loved the other child, my brother, any less. It was that there was something going on right now that I've got to make sure that this is good, right? We all have a certain moment. There's always that issue, if you will, with different populations. It's just right now, it just happens to be this particular moment, right? The next day, it can be something else. And again, it's not to say that, yes, all lives do matter, but right now, Black lives definitely matter, right? We need to focus on this specific issue. And again, I'm just using it as an example. But I was just thinking, as you were saying that, right, there are going to be people who are responding to that and say, well, again, yeah, we can all worry about everybody, but why are we worrying so much, on this other side, right? And I just want to kind of, if you can connect with that imagery of a child, right? It's just the same with Jesus. Jesus specifically went to Samaria. It's not because he didn't love the Jews anymore. It's just because the Samaritans were being, there was racist against them, right? There was racism because we wouldn't fault him for saying, oh, why is he going to Samaria right now, right? So again, putting it into the context of not only Jesus's life, but also challenging ourselves to say, why am I pushing back on this, right? What's the motivation behind that?
I can't go like to the house, and if my wife had a bad day and she says, hey, I had a bad day, I'm like, well, I had a bad day too. Right? That would be a really bad marriage, right? Granted, I try not to do that, but that's essentially what I feel like we're all saying is, hey, this is my chance to hear what someone else is going through, and right now I've never heard the Black side of suffering. I never sought that out, and I think it's this time where the church is able to say, hey, let's actually start to listen to what they went through. But yeah. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I was in a conversation yesterday regarding DACA, which is like a immigration status that individuals have. You can always get into that. It's a lot, so I'm not going to delve too deep into it, but you can look it up on Google. I'm sure you'll find information. I challenge y'all to do that, actually. But someone said, I can't remember exactly. If you're watching this and you said it, thank you. They said Black liberation is our liberation. And that's the truth. It's not only, and I completely agree, it's about hearing the other side. It's also about knowing that when that other side is able to gain what they're fighting for, we've all gained something as well. And it's not just the minorities in the group or the people who are underrepresented. Even white folk are gonna gain because they're gaining the ability to hear from someone who's been quieted for so long, and the ideas that are gonna come forth from that are gonna be so amazing, and we're gonna be able to get so much more done when everybody is allowed that. So yeah, we're allowing other people to have that voice.
Awesome. So I do want to move on to some of the online questions because there's a couple that are pretty intense. One of them is it cool if I share names, or should we keep? Let's keep these anonymous. Is Jesus waiting for racial prejudice to be resolved in the Christian church before he comes again? Is this the cause for the delay of the second coming? As Adventists, I feel like that one hits close to home because we've always had this idea of what bring about the second coming, right? But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a hot topic, admittedly, in my household, specifically with my mom. Shout out to my mom. She's probably not watching, but
she is. I don't know.
Maybe she is. She'll watch on the replay. Fair enough. There is I've heard many different arguments that this is the one thing that Jesus is waiting for, right, to come. If you look in Revelation, not to get too prophetic, but this idea,
it's a Sabbath.
You're right. It is a Sabbath. But this idea that we've been talking about anti-racism, as I've been reading and studying it more, it sounds eerily similar to the description of Laodicea. The reason why I say that is because the statement about Laodicea is that they are lukewarm, right? That they are not hot or cold. And Jesus is like, look, I need you to either be hot or cold. And literally the premise of this anti-racism ideology is that you can't just say you're not racist anymore. That's the lukewarm statement, right? And as a result of that, if you are lukewarm, you're technically cold. But it's definitely the thing that he hates the most, right? That he despises. No, literally says, I would spit you out, right? And so
it's COVID. He would spit you out like it's COVID.
Literally would spit you out, right? And when you see that description, and if you understand Babylon and who Babylon is, right, in prophecy, and the power that is perpetuating, right, racism and racist ideologies, I think there's a close connection. I can't say for sure, even in my studies, to say definitively yes, that we absolutely are waiting for everyone to come together for Jesus to come. But I will say that the characteristics of the Laodicean church, that is literally the description of the last day church, right, that you do not want to be, is specifically very similar to that statement of racist, right? So either anti-racist, right, you're for the gospel, or you are on the other side and you're clearly cold for the gospel. That's what I would say on that.
Wow. I had to go back to the books for that one. That's very interesting. And I've never heard that perspective, and I think that's incredibly valuable to hear, because lukewarmness can happen to anyone of any race. To say that the gospel is only meant for this people is very anti-gospel, and to say that, hey, I think there's a lot of awesome value to that. Anyone else want to share about their thoughts about that, or need to reiterate the question? It's a tough question. So the next one is this. What are your thoughts? Wow, this is a hot one. What are your thoughts on regional and state conferences, and how should the church move forward? That's a tough one. That's a hot one.
Okay. It's a tough question.
Well, let me clarify. Does everyone know what the difference between a state and a regional conference is here? Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah, so I've been reading a little bit more about this in the history. I want to tout two people because Daniela has been pushing this, and I'm with her. Dr. Benjamin Baker. He is a historian specifically focused on the history of African Americans within, well, I should just say Black people within the Adventist Church. He has a website, blacksdahistory.org, it has a lot of information on just the history of how this happened. That's why I'm saying that. And then there's another professor at Southern Adventist University, Kevin Burton, that also has studied this extensively and has written a lot about it. So I just want to, just for people who are curious, I will say that basically it was Ellen White suggested at the time when we were in Earth's history, where obviously Black people, and still are, were considered less than, right? That as an antidote to that for the moment, it was supposed to be a temporary measure, maybe we should worship separately, right? Now, there are a lot of things that happen after. I'm just giving that as a background. A lot of things happen after, and ultimately, Black churchgoers, Black Adventists always wanted to be a part of the main part of, I want to put that out there. Okay. There was never a time where they were like, we don't want the better facilities, we don't want all of that. Right. But they were not welcome as a reflection of, right, the United States and history. Right. So fast forward to today, we're still, I think that oftentimes the conversation around this is restricted to, why are the Black people still separated? Right? Or even to my Latinx brothers in the room, why are the Latinx brothers still separated? Because they're separated as well, right? To Filipino brothers in the room, why are they separated, right? And I would say, I think that going back to the scripture, it is very telling that Jesus himself, the Jew with the privilege, went to Samaria. Okay? The Jew went to Samaria. Okay? The Jew with the privilege, Jesus, even though he had the lowest of privilege, even as a Jew, right? He was from Nazareth, so he had low privilege within his own context, but he still had more privilege, right, than the Samaritan, and he went to Samaria. Why am I saying this? Because if you look at leadership, it was touted in the panel earlier. The powers that be don't necessarily look like me. And so I would say that there might need to be a conversation where everyone is given, maybe we need to reconstruct the table. I love that analogy, right? Maybe we just need to destroy the table. Maybe it's not about bringing everybody to the same table. Maybe we need to destroy it and start all over. But I think oftentimes this conversation is structured towards the underrepresented population coming back into the fold. And you're ignoring the fact that they never wanted to leave to begin with. They were forced to. So.
Wow. I love that. That's very, very good. Very good. Any other thoughts about that? I know it's a hot button topic.
I'll just share really quickly. I want to say I'm not nearly as well versed in the topic, but you did bring to light very quickly physical spaces, facilities, resources. If we're willing to bring all of those up and put them all on the table, and you can tell me that everything is equitable, then maybe things are okay if people aren't bothered by it. But I don't think that that's the case, and maybe we need to question ourselves now. Why is that the case? Why is it not equitable for everyone? And why aren't we doing something about that?
Exactly. I think that we have to look at if, regional conferences, et cetera, were done away with and everyone was, together in one, how equitable would it be for everyone to be in that kind of space, And that speaks back to systemic racism and it speaks back to how is the table built as it is, as you were saying, if you're just bringing them to the table, sure, it looks equal, but is it equitable? Is it actually fair to do that? And speaking again on systemic racism and the leaders in our the hierarchies, how much opportunity would there be for people of color to be in these higher positions, without these regional conferences, etc. And I am all for, being all together as one to not have these separations. But first, we need to make sure that the space is equitable, I think that's, super important to recognize and to deal with. But yeah, it's a hard topic. I can't speak too much on either. So.
Go ahead, Charles. Go on.
Yeah, I also want to say, just to add on to what Jade said, that because I know it can come off sounding, even I can come off sounding as if it shouldn't happen. I absolutely believe that we all should come together. Speaking to your earlier question about kind of assimilation is not necessarily the word, the salad, right? We all need to come together. The question, though, for me is just that if I am feeling the conviction that we need to come together, and you say that you're feeling the conviction that we need to come together, but those things are not meshing, one of us, the Spirit would not, it's not confusion. He doesn't cause confusion, right? So that's what I'm really saying, is that I believe that the Holy Spirit is impressing people that we need to come together, and there are certain ways how. My question would be, are the powers that be listening to the same Spirit? That's really what it comes down to for me.
Wow. No holds over here. This is a table, baby. We lay it out on. All right. So I guess when I just take a listen, and I appreciate all of your inputs. I think, man, I hope it was a learning experience for people who are watching online, because it was for me. That's just, it's super powerful just to hear so many different perspectives. And just to close, how would you guys, if you guys heard from someone at your local church that they have experienced racial prejudice, how would you say would be the best way for them to move forward with that, or to approach leadership? That was one of the online questions.
Wow. The reason why I'm pausing is because the dynamics of that I know can be very complicated sometimes. Because let's say, for example, I would hope that you're in a congregation, like I'm in a congregation where I feel safe to speak to the leadership, and the pastor, the elders. Have created a context where like they are approachable. So that would be the first thing. Is the space that you're in, is it approachable? Are the people, have they shown themselves to be safe? And that can mean a variety of different things for you and what you experienced. Because I also want to be sensitive to the fact that depending upon the experience that this person has had, it might not be safe for them to even be within that church context anymore, right? Like, I just want to put that out there because I don't want anyone who has experienced any type of racial prejudice, anything that made them feel unsafe, to then advise them to then go, you understand, go back, right? Like, I don't want to be a proponent of that at all. So really assessing the situation, and hopefully you have someone, and maybe it is like like David happens to be my pastor, right? So I would even say, hit David up. Like, he's safe. I can vouch for that, right? But really assessing the situation, that would be proceed with caution, because a lot of times you can tell someone who doesn't necessarily have your best interests. And so going back to kind of what Daniela was saying earlier about this whole, like, don't see color. There are a lot of times where these situations happen, and that might be the response. And I would hate for that individual to go away with that, thinking that that is a reflection of the church as a whole. And we're still a reflection of Christ. And so prayer, but also seeking counsel that you trust.
I think it would be really cool to see the church putting in place individuals who are accessible to have conversations like this about issues that they've experienced, because it would be like giving in, like, oh, that means that we have problems, or that things happen here. And the fact is that we do have problems. Every church does, and everyone will experience something different entering it. And that is why there's like conversations about, is the church good or bad, and like, things like that, is because people have come in and have had bad experiences. But if the church takes the initiative to bring someone to the table who looks like us, who looks like a person of color, who looks like a female, who looks like et cetera, who is there in place to make sure that you always have someone that you can speak to that is not like the church president or even the pastor, and you can feel safe knowing that they're going to listen to you unbiasedly, because that is their job and because that is what they came to that church to do, and making sure that there's policies and procedures that will keep you safe, and that are really central to making sure, like, I don't know, you would say, like, you go to when something like this happens, and these are the policies that are going to protect you. We're not going to tell a bunch of people that this is what's happening to you, and making a safe space for those conversations.
Sure. I think it's awesome, because that takes a lot of pressure off, one, the pastor. Not saying that I don't want to do that, but I think that puts more pressure on people. And I think that's what the church is made for. The church wasn't made for people to go to a pastor, was so that people could help pastor other people, help be a listening ear to other people. So I think definitely that's something that churches should implement. Anyone else?
That was just a great idea. I just want to say, just even thinking about it, like, how there are pastors for nurturing or visitation, or even elders who have specific emphasis. Like, I just love how, maybe you set it up where you have a certain leadership member who that's their specific niche. Like, they are an ally for the church. That's their gift. I I think that's incredible. That's just it. Honestly, yeah, somebody needs to adopt that.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing idea. I think that's, you don't see too many things like that in a church setting. You see it in like universities and stuff, you know, where there's a specific person to go to for, let's say, sexual harassment or something, but you know, discrimination issues like that. You don't see that in a church setting, and it's kind of, that's difficult because when we see those things in universities, it really does create a safe place for someone to go to. You know, it creates an environment where this person is here specifically for the issues you're going through. And maybe they're even someone that can completely understand what those issues are. And yeah, that is something that should be, as Daniela was saying, with, you know, something where someone is specifically appointed for this. There's, you know, things that protect a person. It's you know, official in a sense, official a way to address these issues. And I think it's important for the church, again, to really address these issues and really say to their congregation that we are here for your specific grievances, we are here for your specific struggles, and maybe name the struggles and say that we have these things just for you, you know?
All right. Well, again, thank you guys. It's been awesome just to be a listening ear to all of you. You guys have great ideas, great passion, great heart, and I love it when I enter into a conversation where there's not just bashing of the institution, but there is, hey, let's take these steps and be willing to implement them. Back to our listening. An open ear out for these ideas, because I think solace are something that we need to take to get out of this lukewarm idea of being, oh, I'm just not racist, but to be actually anti-racist and to be pro-gospel and to say, hey, this is for everyone. So again, thank you guys. Thank you guys who are watching. We want to continue these table talks, even if it's outside of racism, because it's good to hear other voices on a topic, on something, because it's good to hear someone else's experience. I think if there's anything comes out of here to implement into our church and into our own spiritual lives, is to take a listen to someone else's story. Get out of your own head, get out of your own struggles, and listen to someone who else is struggling. I think that's something that we could all do that can benefit all of us. So thank you guys for I want to give you guys a round of applause. You guys just give yourself a round of applause. That's right. Just do it. Just do it. I want to end off with a word of prayer, and I'll let us go. Let's do it. Father, I want to thank you so much for bringing us to this table where we could have, like what Charles mentioned out of the Bible, that we can be ignited, that we can be stirred, that we can be moved and moved to the heart and say, hey, let's take action. Let's make our churches more loving, more kind, more patient, with a listening ear to those who are struggling. Let us not just be non-racist in our church, but anti-racist in our church. And we can all say that the gospel will be going out of its way to reach those who are marginalized on the fringes of society, and say this is a gospel that reaches out to you as well. Father, be with us today. Be with all these awesome people that have come to this table. I pray that you continue to move them in their spirit and let it be in tune with yours. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Thank you, guys. I'm not sure how to end this, so I'm just going to say blessings to you all, and happy Sabbath. Happy Sabbath to all of you guys. Take care, everyone.